Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Casting Seeds. I'm Savannah, your host and your holistic health practitioner, and you're listening to the first and only holistic based podcast that uses God's singular truth to give you individualized discernment. I'm welcoming to the show today someone who I've been so excited to interview, Chef James Berry, who's the owner of Eat Pluck Organ Meat Seasoning and the former founder of Wholesome To Go. Welcome to the show, James.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Which do you prefer, Chef James or Chef Barry or just Chef, or do you just like James?
Well, any is fine. I tend to, if people are putting chef in front of my name, it's Chef James versus Chef Barry. And I only like that because I like people knowing that, hey, I'm not just someone who owns a business. I'm actually a chef. I've been a professional chef for 20 years. But you can call me James. I mean, it really, whatever works, whatever feels good to you.
I feel like after watching The Bear, because I watched all those
Yeah,
with
you
my
want to call me
husband.
chef? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to be disrespectful. I'm like, yes,
Oh
chef.
no, no. Yeah. That show's fantastic. Yeah, that's fun.
That is actually. I wanted to know in general, because you've been, like you said, you've been a chef for 20 years, which is amazing. But when I was reading about you, I was so shocked to see that you were a picky eater growing up, because I feel like most people who are like, yes, I'm a acclaimed chef, it's because they always like attribute things to their parents of being super diverse with their food and all that stuff, especially when you watch Master Chef shows and things like that. So I'd love to know what was the inspiration of you becoming a chef, because I'm shocked to read about your childhood that you actually ended up becoming a chef.
Yeah, I think my mom is as shocked as you because I grew up in a household where, you knew dinner was ready because the smoke detector went off. It was really that bad. You know, I I think that I've come to explain change by through contrast, really. I think we none of us we only know what we know. And this is regarding anything, whether it's wealth, social status, health. I mean, you name it, anything. We only know what we know. And it's on, and usually we don't know something different or we don't know to change until we're presented with contrast. And contrast might be in the form of like, that person's wealthier than I am. I didn't realize that there were people like I didn't realize it wasn't wealthier. That person's healthier than I am. I didn't realize I wasn't healthy. You know what but it's that kind of mirroring where we are at to something or someone else that really inspires change. And for me, I think it was that I didn't grow up in a foodie household. I think that there was something about cooking that I immediately was drawn to, and I didn't realize until later that actually, oh, what cooking is for me is it's a love language. It's how I show people how I feel. But I didn't have that language when I was younger. I just knew, wow, I really like this. Like I really love the act of cooking something and then presenting it to someone and watching them eat it. There was something very satisfying to me about that. And then later I was like, oh, I do this because this is how I show people I care and love about, love them. So it's it was really a neat process coming to that. But one of the funniest things is like, so I was in junior high school, I think seventh grade to be exact, and I got to take a gourmet cooking class, and it's like the world suddenly made sense. Like I loved that class, and I was not historically great in school. I was, a B student, but I wasn't usually A student. I just didn't thrill me enough to really put that kind of energy into it. But cooking class, I like loved it so much that my mom asked if I could take it twice, like meaning I took it during the day and then I took it also after school. I got
That's
an
so
A.
cute.
I totally got an A in it. I also got awards, I was just so into it. But what was so interesting, and this kind of goes back to your initial question of picky eating, is I was such a picky eater that I didn't actually eat most of the things we cooked.
Really? You didn't even try it after you
I
made it?
didn't. I was so picky that I was just like, I just didn't. And so I remember like there was like this recipe for tostada, like a tostada salad, which is basically like
Mhm.
like a flour kind of tortilla outside, and then you're making a kind of a salad that's more Mexican themed on the inside.
Hmm.
And I made the tostada piece from scratch. And I
Wow.
loved it. Like I loved doing it. But I made and I went home and I made it for my parents and I was so excited and I presented it to them. But if you were to ask me, well, how did it actually taste? I wouldn't be able to tell you because I'd never tried it. I didn't eat it. I was so
You
picky.
weren't curious at all, or did it freak you out? Is that what it
It
was?
freaked me out. It freaked me out. Like, yeah, I mean, now I look at picky eating and I'm like, oh, there was a lot of chaos going, emotional chaos going on in my household. And it was like my picky eating was probably an extension of that chaos. And it was the one thing I could control. So, of
Oh.
course, I held on tightly to it. And once you go down the path of picky eating, it's hard to break free from it because you wrap story around it and you start to build a case around why you're a picky eater. I mean, I
Hmm.
was, to give you an idea, I was paleo before anyone even knew what that existed. So we would go to McDonald's. We would be on like trips, like car trips during the summer, and we would go to McDonald's for lunch. And I would not eat a burger with all the stuff on it. So I wouldn't eat the ketchup and all that stuff. I only like the patty without the bun. So I just ate the meat. And when you're at McDonald's, they already made them. So that way they
Oh,
could
okay.
serve them so quickly. So in my case, they had to make it from scratch. So we always had to wait. And then what they would do is they would serve it just with a bun and it would be wrapped in that paper. And then I would take it and I would just pull the meat. I would make it look like I was eating the hamburger, but I was actually pulling the meat out of the bun and then crumpling the bun and the paper all together to make it look like I just ate the hamburger. So I was eating the no carb thing. I was doing it
Yeah.
like in the late 70s. So this is way before everyone else.
Probably
But I
when
didn't,
carbs also weren't that bad then, too.
yeah. But it was definitely like a thing. Like I remember like yeah, hamburgers were an issue, and not until they made like chicken nuggets was I really happy. Because like once they made chicken nuggets, I was like, oh, this is something I can order, and it's like a fried piece of chicken, and it was like easy for me to do. Like there was no hurdle for my picky eating. And then as long as I could just get the sauce that I liked, which like it's so funny. Like I don't like ketchup, but I like barbecue sauce. Like explain that to me, please.
Because
Anyone.
it's mostly ketchup. That's so. No, I think there's a big difference though between
Yeah.
ketchup and barbecue sauce.
But there's
But
just yeah, the picky eating just it plagues upon itself. And really I didn't get out of picky eating until I went to culinary school. And that was honestly in my late 20s. So
well,
my
do you
early
feel like
30s.
you had to get pulled out of picky eating because you were in culinary school?
No, I think you can be picky or kind of like ill-tempered or any kind of personality you want to bring to any situation, anyone could do. It just might limit them. And I mean, I think the reality is if I hadn't approached culinary school with the determination to try everything,
Mhm.
then I would have stayed in my picky eating and I would have limited my experience, which I think, most people do, right? I mean, if you
Yeah.
don't change your mindset, then you enter every situation as you were.
Well, I 100% agree with that. And I want to touch base too on what you said was so wise about the wanting to, as a child, to control your circumstances, and you felt like food was the biggest way to do that. I've made some moms and dads a little angry a few times because probably because I'm not a parent yet, but I did nanny professionally and I've worked with families for consulting in holistic health. So I mean, I'm around kids a lot. I work with kids a lot. I know it's different when it's your own, but I always say the number one gateway into picky eating is the parents. It's always starting with the parents at home. So I would love to know, off the top of my head, and because you said that control aspect, how do you get your girls, because you have two beautiful girls, to get them like trying, I know organ meats, I'm sure you do it with Pluck, which I have in the background.
Oh yeah, I see it now. Yeah, that's cool.
I'm sure you do it with Pluck, but like, do they actually eat like heart and liver and things like that? Or was picky eating an issue with your girls? And if it was, did you do anything specifically for that?
Yeah, so I'll first want to say that as person who does have kids, I wholeheartedly agree with you that it is the parents. And something when I was working with clients, that was they would always talk about like, I don't understand, my kid's addicted to Cheerios. I'm like, oh my God, that's crazy because Cheerios grow on trees and that's probably how they got it. You're right. But it's like, no, no, they don't. Like they're addicted to them because you brought them into the house. And I can fully take ownership of that I'm, like here I am, I'm aware of health, I'm a chef, and yet if you were to line up my wife and I and say, okay, which one of you has negatively influenced your kids with food, it would be me. Because and there is something about it, like, and maybe if there's anyone listening out there, female or male, will hopefully see what I'm saying, which is that I think a lot of men use food to connect with their children. And I know that that could be true with women as well, but it's more with men. I think that we tend to like, oh, particularly if it's a traditional household where the man is working outside of the house, the woman is working inside the house, that the man, when he is around the kids, will say, well, let's go do something special. Let's get some ice cream. And so that's how they're connecting. And I do the same thing, it's like how I was raised was like, oh, you get rewarded for a bad day or a good day with treats, right? And so it was like I've transferred that initially to my kids, and it's taken me a lot of effort to change that. And I happily say that my wife and I have really done a great job of co-parenting of really being on the same page on what is important to us and what we want to transfer to our kids. That both kids are very good eaters. So one way that I got around transferring my picky eating to them is I never talked about it and I never modeled it in front of them. So whenever we ate, I ate everything that we served. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
only like as they've gotten older and they've already formed their kind of own habits, have they started to learn like, oh yeah, there's certain things like I don't like raw tomatoes, for example, like which which this is kind of a whole tangent of a topic is like is there is a such thing as picky eating, and then there's also a thing called intuitive eating. And so there is, and it's a fine line.
100%.
It's a very fine line. Like sometimes I think that, like, for example, if initially like a young kid is continually telling you, I don't like red meat, let's just say, like, I prefer chicken or whatever. They're really being clear. Like, it's not that they don't want to eat animal protein. They're just like, I just don't want red, like steak. I don't like it like this. I like it. It just, like, and so part of you be like, well, stop being picky. But another part, there's another piece that's like, well, kids are really, they're much clearer on what their bodies need or don't need. They don't understand why, but they're way more like in touch with their intuitive knowledge of what their body needs. And so, using me as an example, I have never gravitated towards raw tomatoes. Well, isn't it interesting that I'm a redhead and I'm very pale? And cooked tomatoes are what support me not getting sunburned, but raw tomatoes do not support that.
Wow. When did you find that out?
I learned that in my 20s that there's an when you cook a tomato, it actually, and I'm forgetting the name because I don't talk about it very often, so anyone can look it up though. That cooked tomatoes increase a lipine, I think it's called, and that basically that is one of the uh, ingredients towards that when you get it in your body that it helps you not get sunburn as easily. Um,
That's
and
awesome.
and so it was like, oh, well, is my raw tomato thing more innate, like more kind of like intuitive, or is it picky eating? Um, yeah, I find that kind of stuff very interesting, but I do think that you have to take kids, you kind of have to look at anyone that's a picky eater, and this is kind of how we deal with it with clients and in general, even with our kids, is you really have to look at a few things. You have to look at texture and you have to look at taste. It's so because we're all human and we're all basing our eating off of those two things usually. And so if you think about it, the standard American diet is really based. So we have four known tastes. Well, technically it's five, but we'll cover all of them. So there's salt, sweet, bitter, sour. Okay, those are the ones we all hear about in school and we learn. Well, the fifth
Mm.
one is umami that was discovered in the 90s and it's from Japan, and that's kind of most described as savory, and that's what pluck is. Pluck, look, organ meats are naturally umami. MSG is umami, and that's why they add it to a lot of ultra processed foods. And then there's a sixth one that they've recently discovered or identified, which is basically like when food has gone bad. Like there's an actual taste that they think a flavor receptor that our bodies recognize as like, oh, this food is turned, this is bad or
Like a
rancid.
moldy? Is it like
Yeah, it's
moldy?
kind of because if you think about it, and I really see what they're trying to say is
Hmm.
like food, like milk that's gone bad has a very distinct taste versus milk that isn't bad, right? And
Yeah.
your body picks up on it immediately. You smell it, you taste it. It's like you can, there's a clear difference. So it's what's that
Mhm.
difference? It's not that it's just sour, it's something else. So they think that that's the sixth taste, but let's just focus on the other five. Well, the standard American diet is primarily salty and sweet. So anyone that's a picky eater is locked into salty sweet. And you can really look at it. Just look at the foods they gravitate towards, right? French fries, sweet treats, it's like very chips, like very salty, sweet things. And so the way to kind of support someone in becoming more adventurous is you have to include those other flavors. And you don't have to include them in huge amounts. You can just start this the way you would with like a pet. If you were changing a pet's diet, you would start with 95% of the old food and 5% of the new food. And then over time, sometimes it would take, 2, 3, 4 weeks. You would eventually get to 95% of the new food and 5% of the old food. And that's the same thing you can do with a kid. Is let's say they're they're eating, like a lot of people use Pluck for this. So like if you're serving your kid anything, like what's something that most people serve their young kids that are picky, like
I
chicken
feel like
nuggets?
when, yeah, I feel like when I'm working with clients to kind of outsource, the main diet that I hear all the time is chicken nuggets, mac and cheese is a big one.
Yep.
Um, or a lot of fruit too. Like the kids will only eat fruit, or they only will eat burgers. Like a lot of ultra processed foods, and when they're eating natural foods, it's very high in sugar.
Yeah. So what I would do if I was eating the nuggets, if I was eating the ground meat, basically anything savory, and same with the mac and cheese, as I would add either a little bit of Pluck. So I would add initially like half of a teaspoon, depending on the serving size, to their meal. I would not tell them that it's organ meats at all. I'd just say, hey, this is a really good seasoning. Can't wait for you to try it or whatever. Or don't even tell them, just mix it in. And they'll probably just say, wow, this is so good. They won't even think about that it's organs. They'll just go like, this is really tasty. And a lot of times kids get so addicted to Pluck that they cry when it's out. Alternatively, if you're like, hey, I don't have Pluck and I don't want to support your product yet, I just want to incorporate something new, then the other thing you could do is you can get like pickle juice or like cultured vegetable juice. Those are both going to be on the more sour side, and you would just add a little bit of it to the mac and cheese or to the ground meat or to the well, the chicken nuggets is a little harder to do, but let's just say if the kid dips the chicken nugget into anything, then
Yeah, I
I
was gonna say
would,
sauce.
yeah, I would mix it into the sauce, and I would do the same thing with the Pluck as well. It's like, but just providing some little hint of that other flavor, which is
Mm.
that sour flavor, is going to start to expand their palate a little bit. But you're not giving so much that their palate is shocked. Like you don't want them to notice it. You want to just do a tiny bit initially and start to acclimate them to it, and then continue to increase it as they acclimate to it. But
That's
you'll eventually find, and this is a fact that I think people forget, is we will naturally enjoy anything as long as we eat it enough. So you can create a bad habit. Like if you're like, I remember I never used to like chocolate. And then I got really into like, I was living with someone who loved dark chocolate. And then they started eating it. And then I eventually started eating it. And now it's like, well, oh, now I have an affinity for dark chocolate because I ate it enough. Right. And so,
Yeah.
and you can, if anyone's ever been incarcerated, they'll be the first to tell you, like, I hated the food when I got into jail, but once I got out, I missed it.
Wow.
So it's just about getting it into the person's diet over time and doing it enough where it becomes a non-issue. And then I would say other ways to that I support my kids to not be picky is I include them in the entire process. So from meal planning, they're a part of the meal planning.
I love that
They,
you said that.
yeah, they're part of the meal planning, which I think is a hugely underused tool, health tool, by the way. Meal planning is fantastic, and we can talk more about that later, but fantastic health tool. They're part of that. They go through the cookbooks or the magazines we're looking for recipes with us, and they get to choose what they want for dinner too. We just have certain criteria, like it's got to have protein, it's got to have some fat, and it's got to have some vegetables. Like that's our criteria, right? Um, and then we include them in the grocery list process. Like, let's write the list together. Let's go to the grocery store together. So they're helping to, pick which vegetables do we get. Hey, do those look good? Do that look good? Like, what do you think? And then when we get home, they're part of the process of putting it away and potentially even cooking it. They love to help cook. So even when I'm working with them with cooking wise, I'm always like, hey, let's see what this tastes like raw in this state, and then let's compare it to when it's cooked. And then we kind of make a game of it. And I've been doing that since they're kids. And so now I don't even have to do it anymore. It's effortless. They're constantly trying things now.
Do you feel like they're excited to cook with you or go to the store with you and like almost it created better and well-mannered behavior out when you're doing things because they're more in tune with the process?
100%. And so, and I can directly uh, kind of connect this. So I have a 12, they're now 12 and 8-year old, two girls. And last school year, we kind of got, we fell into some kind of bad habits. I mean, I say bad, they're probably better than most people's, but they're bad for us. So like kids were kind of like every Friday they would just assume they got screens, and it would be like, oh, like let's go watch screens. They'd be on the screens for a few hours. And we were letting them get school lunches and they weren't really eating. The school lunches were horrible, like because our kids are gluten free. And like at my kids' elementary school, one of the options is a bagel. Like it's literally a gluten-free bagel. That's the entire lunch. And you're like, what? Like, how is
Yeah,
that healthy? Like
yeah.
a bagel? That's
It's
it.
not
Like
a,
they're
a meal.
not, yeah, they were treating that as though it was lunch. One of the most important meals of the day, it's like they were treating that as though that was the meal. And we are like, that's literally insanity. So we kind of like let that happen now. And then my kids went to camp this summer for 6 weeks. And so my wife and I had like a reset of like a little distance from the kids, kind of got to regroup and kind of like really get clear on like, okay, how do we want the household to be different? And we literally spent time during those 6 weeks rebuilding how we wanted things differently, building a new, like we created a chore chart that would be how they earned screen time. We reevaluated what foods we were bringing into the house, and we basically created boundaries and said, okay, we're no longer bringing these X kind of foods into the house, and we're only going to do this. We're going to now make their own lunches, and here's some ideas of what we're going to do. Like we created a whole plan around it. And then we also got a lockbox for our electronics. And so now there's no temptation. It's not out. It's not, they're not trying to find it. They know exactly where it is, but they can't get into it. And so though I have to say, like those changes, it's only been a couple of weeks, 3 weeks to be exact, since they got back from camp. But talk about different kids. Like
Yeah.
we are in such a sweet spot as a family. We're eating more from home. So now instead of eating out every week, we eat out once a month, if that. So
Wow.
everything's at home. The kids, we're playing more games and cards together as a family. There's such better quality time as a family. So we're eating better. We have better quality time together, and the kids are barely watching. They're barely on screens. And if they are on a screen, it's like on a TV. And it's like we're watching a family movie. And then that's
Together.
it. Yeah. So it's, and the kids behavior wise are like so much better. So I guess that's why I'm sharing it. It's like, sometimes the behavior is potentially because as a parent, we're not laying enough clear boundaries is potentially one thing. Two is that we're not modeling what we're asking of them. So like my wife and I, previously we were on our phones and telling the kids not to be on screens, right? So what we do now is like we have clear cutoffs. Like the workday is done, so are we with our phones. Like the phones go away. You know what I mean? Like so now it's truly like we're all in the same boat. We have scheduled quiet time, reading time, creative time. The kids have to be outdoors specific time, and that's how they get checks. Like that's part of the board,
I
the
love
chore
that.
board.
Are you
And
guys going to do the 1,000 hours in a year?
I don't, I'm sure it will end up being that. I don't think we haven't consciously gone into it, but we're really like sticking to this. Like, I'm trying to think what are some other ones. Like kids have to make their beds. There's different things that they just have to do for their own, walking the dog, feeding the dog and cat, those kind of things. But they're just now more a part of the family community, like the things that kind of make our community flow and make it produce our community and keep it well. But here's what's fascinating. Anyone out there that's listening that's going like, I could never do that. I will tell you right now, the kids love it.
They
They
do.
love it. It was amazing for when they got home from camp and we showed them what we created. They they get excited to check a box off when they've done that chore. They get so excited. Okay, hey, Mama, Papa, put my thing back in the lockbox. They love knowing that it's there and can you make sure it's getting charged while it's in there? Like they love the boundaries that we've set and they love that we're doing it as a family and they can feel the intimacy that we're co-creating together. And I am such a happier parent. They're happier kids. So anyone that's resistant, I would just offer that I would kind of like ask you to just try it because it is so much better. And you have no idea. If you're resistant, you have no idea how much better it could be.
Can I say I 100% agree? Because my parents' parenting style growing up was very lackadaisy, like let the kids kind of decide what they want to do. There were still clear boundaries and rules of what we couldn't do, but I would say it was much more children led than like mom and dad are first, then kids second, and we are one cohesive unit, right? So it made it kind of confusing with who the actual leadership was. So I would literally, and you could ask my family this anytime, I would make chore charts for my sister and I because I craved that type of I don't want to say it's rigid, I can't talk today, rigid leadership. That's what I was trying to say. But I wanted some type of organization so that I did feel like I had some sort of sense of accomplishment. And I think I kind of filled that void personally through sports and athletic achievements when I was a kid. So then when I didn't, like if my team didn't win or if I failed in any way, it was like a devastating blow because that was the one thing that gave me validity. And like what you were talking about with kind of a sense of control, that was the one thing I felt like I could control. So when I couldn't do it, it was like my whole life was shattered for that day or for that week. And then my whole life would be aiming to redo that over again next Saturday or next Sunday, whenever the next game was, right? So I 100% agree with you that it gives great, which I also, it's something I didn't expect are the beginning of our interview to even talk about like child achievements and how food could affect this in an entire family unit in any way, shape, or form. But it's true, even when my husband and I, at the beginning of the week, because we make all of our dogs food from scratch, and for us meal prepping, which I'd love to know what you think of our meal prepping method, because I feel like I kind of made it up, but I'm sure other people do it. We will batch cook things, but we do it very plain. So I'll make a ton of, we buy a half a cow. I'll make a ton of the meat and not season it or not do anything with it, except for little things like pluck. I'll add pluck into it because that's a basic, great way to cook your food. and add organ meat into it, but we make all of our things prepped and ready so that during the week we can go in and just be like, okay, look, we have ground turkey, we have ground beef or whatever, and now let's just throw it in a pan, add some coconut aminos because we're also gluten free. Let's chop up, like finish chopping veggies, and look, we have a stir fry. Or I feel like having more Italian tonight. So that's kind of how we do our meal prepping. I call it like in bulk plain meal prepping, but it
I
makes
think
our
it's
lives easier.
I think it's brilliant, and yeah, I usually recommend that for people because really the difference between one meal and another is the sauce or the seasoning you use. It's the
Yeah.
flavors, and so having that kind of bulk cooking already done, and then you're changing up the flavors based on your mood or your your intention that night is absolutely the way to go. I see no issue with that. I would highly recommend people take follow suit.
I feel so
And
good that Chef James just approved my meal prepping method.
well, I mean, look, I'll be the first to say, like, I would prefer if that's a great place to start or end up, but I would just offer that just meal plan. Like, I
Mhm.
don't care how or how you end up prepping your meals for the week or preparing for your week, but just plan it because particularly if you're someone who's struggling with your health and your family's health, meal planning, I mean, let's just we'll unpack it. Like, so meal planning A, you get to you get to dictate what your meals are based on your work week. And that's really important because what most people face every day is decision fatigue or lack of planning. And so what happens when we lack of plan or where we lack a plan, we have to get food out or we go eat out because we've hit either decision fatigue and exhaustion and we're like, oh, I just need food, right? So that lack of planning results in us eating out or eating to go food. And there is no way to be healthy if you're eating out because eating out is the restaurants are businesses, they have bottom lines and they are trying to make a profit. So they're choosing cheap ingredients. The only way to be healthy is to control your ingredients. So control is a word, yes, we were talking about it around picky eating, but it's also
Mhm.
a way to get healthy.
Yeah, it's a
Um,
sense of safety too. It's okay to
totally.
want to control certain things. It's healthy to do.
Absolutely. It's not a bad word. It's just the intention we put behind it that can
Mhm.
sometimes, change it. But so the other thing that meal planning does is not only you're cooking from home, more controlling your ingredients, but now you have a list when you go to that grocery store. So there's no like spontaneous emotional purchases. There's not like oh, I'm gonna buy that protein bar, that candy bar, that ice cream because it's on sale. It's like, no, it's not on your list. So you're not buying it. So you're only buying what you're going to use. And clearly we're not writing on that list like, oh, let's just have tubs of ice cream in the refrigerator or the freezer because we just want ice cream. If it's not in your meal plan, then you don't buy it because you don't write on the list. And I would
This is
also offer,
convicting. This is convicting for me. Okay. I
yeah.
need to hear
So then I would also offer, because this goes back to what we talked about earlier about how parents are the culprits, is that if you don't want your kids to eat it, do not bring it in the house. And I
this.
say kids, but the truth is for yourself too. Like we have to use our emotional intelligence. Like we're adults. And as you said, we're the ones that have to we need to take responsibility for our household. And so we have to take ownership. When we've learned the type of person we are, we have to take ownership of that. So meaning I am someone who cannot stop. Okay, so if there is ice cream in the freezer, I don't have a stop button. So I will just finish it. Or I'll eat way more than my stomach can hold and I'll feel sick. Like that's how I eat those kind of foods. So I have learned to just not bring it in the house because or to make it myself, control the ingredients and make it so clean and low sugar that it's like, well, it's okay if I eat more than I really want, or something like that, right? Or to make such real ingredients in it that my body knows when to stop because there's no synthetic stuff or like stabilizers or artificial ingredients that are tricking my body, right? So that's really important, like to know what is your household and what is your weak spots, and then make sure that you're creating an environment where you don't have to always be faced with your weak spots. Like just create, like, like they talk about this a lot when you first have your kid. Like instead of being willy-nilly with your environment and creating an environment where you always have to say no, just create an environment where you never have to say no. Like safeguard things, or don't have things out that are going to require you to say no. Like create
Yeah,
an
it's
environment where the kid can bounce around, jump off things, do whatever they want, and you don't have to say no because none of it is outside of your parameters of what you deem is unsafe, right?
what you're saying is it's like all throughout Proverbs. It talks about like God talks about removing the temptation to sin, right? So it's not
Exactly.
about, because it will use extreme things. So it's like, yeah, if you're a drunkard, maybe you shouldn't hang out at a bar, right?
Right.
But when it comes down to self-control in general, which is, by the way, the fruits of the Holy Spirit, the last one is self-control. And it's really hard because it's love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, and self-control. I think I missed one. Whatever. There's 9 of them. But the last one, I always say, like, if you don't have love, then you can't get to joy. If you don't understand what joy is, then you can't have peace. And so if the last one is self-control and even checking on that standard with your food, right? And the environment that you're creating in your home, just like you're talking about, if you don't have that peace and all of that about the food that you're bringing into your home, then how on earth are you going to have self-control? It makes no sense. But people don't take those things, I feel like, for Christians specifically, or people even in other religions, like they don't take the practical application of their life and their spiritual life. And sometimes they don't apply it to their everyday things, which is so silly. Because if you are walking with God, if you are a Christian, you're supposed to filter everything through Christ, right? So, like I
Yeah.
said,
Our
it's
hum
interesting. Oh, sorry. I was just saying
I
it's
was going to
interesting
just
hearing
say,
what you're saying.
yeah, I was going to say our humanity. We're always pushing up against our humanity, our inconsistency,
Yeah.
or just our humanness. And so, yeah, I'm a big believer in like create the environment that doesn't constantly challenge you because life is hard enough. Like create an environment that's affirming, loving, caring, and one that doesn't push your buttons every time. And so for me, that means not bringing in food that's I don't want myself or my kids to eat. And then it becomes like a conscious like effort. Like so if you really are craving something and want it, then you got to work for it. And as it should be, right? I mean, keep in mind back in the day when people wanted anything, they had to make it. If they wanted bread, they had to make it. If they wanted ice cream, they had to make it. If they wanted cookies, they had to make them. And when you make these things, that's a challenge I put out to anyone is for a month, make everything you eat from the bread to the ice cream to the whatever, make it all and
Wow.
see how it changes how you eat because we're very much locked into conveniences. We're very out of touch with the time and the effort and the ingredients that actually go into something. Like I remember
Mm,
when I was first learning to cook, one of the kind of like moments that I was like that blew my mind was learning how to make hummus. And you would go like, really? But it was. Hummus was something I didn't grow up with. It wasn't as plentiful, back in the day. And then when it showed up on the markets, it was like this kind of this food that felt exotic, and it was like, what is it? It's so good and creamy, but what is it? And there would always be these ingredients in it. You're like citric acid. Okay, I know that's lemon juice, but that they didn't put lemon juice, and they would have all these other oils and these things, and it seems so complicated. But then I learned it's like, oh no, there's like 4 ingredients. That's all you really need, and you can make it yourself. It's so much cheaper to make yourself. It's so good, and I
tastes
just
so much
remember
better.
it's so much better. And when I learned that, I was like, oh, so not only can I make it healthier, I can make it more affordably, but it's actually not that time consuming. And so you think about like, what are the things we're eating that we're kind of depending on? And just for a month, like pare it down and so that you're only eating things that are ingredients versus that have ingredients. And it's going to really force you, like when you have to make all the treats you want to eat, when it's going to really force you to Like you're going to find you're either going to get bored really fast, or you're not going to eat them as much because you'll have, taken the time to make that cake, those cookies, whatever it is, and you'll be like, oh, only eat a little bit. We want this to last. Like you'll literally build that into the system because you'll know that you don't want to take the time to make it again.
And I ask, have you put Pluck into any like fun treat type food? I put it in my ranch, and that was super good. But I also like the taste of organ meats because I've been eating it for about 10 years because I love the Weston A. Price Foundation. I read
Yeah.
his book 10 years ago, and then I got another one and all that fun stuff. And also in my field, because I'm a holistic health practitioner, I love doing stuff. But my husband thinks I'm a freak of nature. So I like I don't tell him and I kind of treat him like he's a kid sometimes. And then afterwards I'll be like, so that had heart in it, or
Yeah.
and he'll be like, of course it did, and he'll like not trust me.
That's
But
so funny.
I
But he knows
I'd
that
love
it
to know if you
tastes
put in
good.
like he does. Yeah, he's
Yeah.
actually grown to really like the taste of quite a few of those things. That's why I loved everything that you explained before because it worked. But I'd love to know if you put it in like any treats. Like, have you ever done it in cookies or things like that? Or is that just like super wild for me to ask?
No, no. I mean, what we internally we say Pluck goes with everything except ice cream, and then someone was like, actually, I tried it on ice cream and it was delicious. So we are convinced that Pluck goes actually well with everything. But now the question is, well, which Pluck? And
Yeah.
so there's, so for anyone that's not aware, Pluck is a seasoning. So it's a seasoning blend, organic seasoning blend that has desiccated, 100% grass-fed cow organs in them. So it's got freeze-dried powdered liver, heart, kidney, spleen, and pancreas combined with spiced herbs. So basically what we're doing is we're creating shelf-stable organs and we're making them taste good so that anyone could eat them. Because we look at organ meats as the gateway to nutritional abundance, and
Mhm.
Pluck is the gateway to organs. In no way do people have to stop with our product, but we just think it's the easiest and the most kind of delicious way, in our judgment, to get organs into your diet. So,
No
uh,
bias, it really is delicious. I'm
uh,
gonna tell you. I was
thank
excited to
you.
try it and I've been wanting to for a while and it was super good. And you can't, I mean, even by itself, because I tried it on its own, I loved the flavor of like the original. I think it's super great.
Yeah, thank you. I use it all the time. My family puts on everything. But I like we put it on popcorn. It's so good on popcorn.
Is it the
Um,
garlic one?
Oh, we put any of them. I mean, that's the beauty is that like so this garlic one you should definitely try as a dip because that's if you add that to like sour cream, it tastes like ranch
Well,
basically.
I was gonna say that's the one I added to the ranch because I
Oh,
make my
there,
own homemade ranch and that
yeah,
was so good.
yeah, that one's great. Um, The the original and the spicy malt, I mean, I use all three of them in different ways. I've even lately started mixing them. Like, so sometimes I'll use zesty garlic and original together, and I was like blown away because that was so good. I had never done that before. I only did that like a few months ago, and I was like, wow, this is really good, actually. Um, but I mean, if I were making cookies or brownies or something like that, I would add pure to them. Like I would put like a teaspoon of pure into the batter. The key is just the ratio. You don't want the ratio to be so high that people taste it, but you want it to be enough where you're getting some nutrition. And technically, a teaspoon of our pure, which is just the organ meat, there's no spices and herbs or salt. A teaspoon of that is equal to 2 ounces of organ meats. So
Wow.
a teaspoon goes very far. Like,
Yeah.
because when you take an organ, 100% organ, and you freeze dry it, you're left with about 20%. It's like 21 or something around there. So it's incredibly concentrated. And then if you think about it, when then you powder it from there, it's just like you can pack a lot and just a little bit. Like when you lose the water, it's incredibly dense and nutrient dense at that. So you technically just a little bit goes very far. Like I usually add a half a teaspoon to a teaspoon to a smoothie if I'm making that. I something I do as well that a lot of people are still learning is possible is I add it to my pets' foods. So
I was gonna ask you about that. That's so funny.
Yeah.
I love that.
You wouldn't add the ones with seasonings and salt because that stuff's not good for pets. But if I'm just
Like
talking
garlic.
pure, yeah. So
Yeah.
you wouldn't do garlic, you wouldn't do the original, but you can do pure. And pure is just the organ meat, as I said. And as long as you're using that one is interchangeable. You can give that to your pets or yourself. And that one, I have a cat who is sometimes picky about her food,
Mm.
and I just sprinkle a little bit on there and she freaks out, like to the point where she'll eat it and then look to me for more. And she won't eat the food again until I put more on there. Like she's so into it. The dog will pretty much eat anything, but I know that the dog loves it when I add it, but it's the cat that really freaks out about it. But anyone that has a picky eating animal, just a little bit of pure on that animal's food and they will no longer be picky. That is a guarantee. I
We should
promise
start
people on that
we
because
should
I've
start
watched it.
advertising Pluck in like all like dog and animal stores. You could just
Well,
do the
we're starting to get some actual pet food suppliers ordering us for that.
so
Yeah,
cool. That's
because the
so
other thing
exciting.
is a lot of pet foods are not human grade. So human
Yes.
grade, if anyone doesn't know, so when an animal is slaughtered, they're testing the animal and they're assessing, well, this is okay for humans, and then this part isn't. And a lot of times the parts that aren't washed well. They're just kind of discarded and really not considered. They're not really mindfully kind of cut from the animal and they'll just kind of clump all that stuff together. It won't really be tested, and they'll just serve it to pets. And I was learning, for example, I was listening to this book called Eat Like a Fish, and a lot of people don't know this, of course, but he talked about how when he used to be on these boats and he was collecting I forget which type of fish it was. It wasn't tuna, but when he was collecting a certain type of fish, they would on the boat, once they caught the fish, they would cut it open. And if it had worms and stuff like that, which a lot of fish do, they would
Mhm.
throw it in one pile. And if it was clean, they would throw it in another pile. And that one would be the sushi grade stuff that would be used for sushi restaurants and stuff like that. And they even had like someone on the boat that was specialized in cutting it for sushi. So they would cut it right there and then go and freeze it. But the stuff with the worms and stuff was sold cheaply to companies like McDonald's, and that's what fish fillet is made with.
Oh, I'm really glad I've never had a fish fillet. That is
Yeah. So,
disgusting.
but all to say, what it's a very enlightening about. I'm not trying to tell people, oh, don't eat at McDonald's. I want you to choose that on your own because I don't want to disparage another company. But what I will say though is that if the food is cheap, there's a reason for it.
Mhm. I mean, that makes sense. Like you were saying earlier, I mean, every company, every restaurant has a profit margin, and the cheaper that they can make it, the better, because then they're able to make more of a profit off of the consumer, right?
Yep.
Which I'd love to know, speaking of like your company and profits and stuff, I'd love to know one where you got Pluck from, the name, because I think it's super interesting and fun. And I think it's fun too, because when I think of Pluck, I guess it made me think more of chicken. So I was surprised that it was more beef organ meats. And I would love to know, because most of the supplements I feel like that everyone gets, or beef organs in general, is always from New Zealand. What is like the excitement over New Zealand beef that just doesn't happen apparently anywhere else in the world? So,
Yeah. Well, so yeah, those are all such great questions. So first, the name is actually the branding company that I hired when I was first creating the business. They discovered this. It's a Portland branding company. And so Pluck is actually an old term for animal organs. It's just one that's not used as much
is
anymore.
it
But
really?
if anyone would like to look it up, back in the day, they would say stuff like, "Oh, you want your pluck with that," meaning like after they were giving them the carcass of whatever, that was insinuating, "Do you want the organs from the animal as well?" And
That's so cool.
yeah, so like you were saying, you get a cow share, and so let's just say if you were going to the butcher to pick it up, that's what they would have said to you back in the day is like, "Oh, you want your pluck with that." And they were absolutely referring to like the liver, the heart, the kidney, those kind of items. Um,
I had to ask my butcher to keep those. He thought I
Mm.
was wild. And I was like, if there are other people that don't want theirs, I'll
Yeah,
literally
you'll
take
take
it.
them.
Yeah.
Totally.
And now,
Yeah, I
in the
mean
past few years,
that's the
they love
reality,
it.
right? Is like, so we have to remember, like, whenever anyone's like, I wish this was different about our food systems. Well, as I mentioned, I've been in the field 20 years, and that has been a constant question of mine is how do we truly make a difference? What can we do? How do we make change? And sadly, well, I guess sadly and poignantly, it always goes back to one thing. You vote with your money. And if you don't buy it, the industry will stop making it or selling it. And organ meats are a perfect example of that. Organ meats after World War II were predominantly sold because the government had actually started a campaign. They invested in a campaign to get people to eat organ meats because during World War II, there was a fear of running out of animal protein because so much of it was going abroad. So that's when they created things like Meatless Mondays. People think that that's a recent thing. It's actually not. The government created it back in the day during World War II to discourage people from eating so much animal meat because of the fear
Wow.
of shortage. The other thing they did was they came out with all these names for organ meats like variety meat and um, they there were some other names like I think like independence meat. They were all trying to create patriotic terms because they wanted people to do it and it worked. Like people, if you talk to anyone that was a child then, it's just usually like grandparents or parents for some people, they'll tell you, yeah, we ate liver and onions pretty much weekly, and it's because the government was pushing for it. Well, then when the soldiers came back from the war, you had now two people working from home or two people were working because when the soldiers were gone, a lot of the women started working. They didn't want to give that up. So now you had two people working in the household. So you had more money coming in. And what do you do when you have more money? Well, I want the more expensive cuts. We can afford it now. And so slowly people started to not purchase organ meats because they saw them as cheap and they saw them as peasant food. And
Uh,
so what happened was when you don't get people buying them, the butchers don't carry them because they don't want to lose money because they do go bad quickly. And then you start to not see them at your butcher. So you don't even think to ask for them because they're not there. And then once you don't see them and you don't buy them, then you stop learning how to cook them. So then we start to lose the culinary knowledge. And then you get to this point where we're at now, where we're one of the only nations in the world that really doesn't eat organ meats very often. I mean, most other countries, it's part of their cuisine, and we're suffering for it. Most Americans, I think it's around 94 to 95% of Americans are nutrient deficient, and yet we're clearly not calorie deficient. We are an obese nation, so it has nothing to do with like we're not getting enough food. It has to do with we're making poor food choices.
well, it's also a lot of it has to do with comfort as well too, because the past few generations, that's what we have not grown up with. I think that that's like a huge adaptation that I'm millennial and I see a lot of millennial and Gen Z um, starting to kind of realize like, oh wow, I didn't grow up with these things and now I'm kind of having to force myself to fall in love with these foods that I'm actually kind of scared of or not familiar with or really intimidated by, whether it be smell or lifestyle. And actually, I found out that 30% of Gen Z in the US actually grew up more vegetarian or vegan overall because parents in general were actually just scared of meat. They were scared of how to treat it. They didn't know how to cook it properly, let alone organs and things like that. Which I would love to hear your opinion on this after I feel like I'm so excited. I'm asking you a million questions, but because I do want to know why New Zealand still is like
Yeah,
top dog.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but
absolutely.
but I've noticed that in general, when people are kind of scared of meat, that's when they tend to go more one way, or it is for animal rights, which I totally understand. And then people tend to lean really far one way with doing just like ketogenic diet all the time. And from my research, being in holistic health and also just how humans were made, we can eat both. But I've noticed that it isn't so much because I know long term, not everyone can handle keto, and same thing long term, not everyone can handle veganism, but both seem to fight that they're the extreme best. What I've noticed that's best for new people in general nutritionally tends to be a high fiber, so like different types of fiber diet, mixed with, of course, nose to tail eating and understanding and getting food locally sourced and like shaking the hands with the farmer type of food, whether you grow it yourself or you get it locally. I've seen people just even switch out just from buying their groceries to like, you know what, I'm going to start buying my fruits and veggies just at a farmer's market. And people naturally just started losing weight just from that. So I'd love to know your opinion on that or what you've seen, because I know you've helped even celebrities come, like I know a lot of people's focus is weight loss, but you have always been more focused, you and your wife, on nutrition, which I love because not a lot of chefs really care about general nutrition. So do you kind of see that as well? At least that's what I've noticed with my clientele, but I'd love to know what you've noticed and what's best for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think as you mentioned, everyone's got their journey. And if anything, I'm a big fan of, well, have your journey. Like whatever diet you think you should be on, great. Because we need to have the dignity of our journey because it's that journey that gets, like we started this whole podcast off, it's the contrast, right? So we need to be doing something to then discover that it's either working or not working for us.
Mm.
And I guess ultimately the thing that I focus on is, okay, have the dignity of your process, but here's the one caveat or the one thing I ask of everyone is there's one person in the relationship with you that will never lie, that will always be true to what's working and not working.
Mm.
And so all I ask is that you listen to that one person. No matter what your head believes, no matter what you ethically stand for, I require that you do listen to one person, and that's your body. Because if it's not working, your body will tell you. And so but you have to be listening and you have to get off that soapbox and be like, drop the ego around it and just be honest. Like if you're feeling bloated every time you eat, what you're eating is not working. If you're struggling with your sleep, what you're doing is not working. If you
Acne,
acne,
body odor.
body
Yeah.
odor, hair falling out, dark circles under your eyes, any like glands that are inflamed. But any of these things that are keeping you from thriving are most likely connected to either what you're eating or the environment you're living in and how your body's responding to either or both. And we're not listening. And so that's the one thing I require of everyone that ever works with me or I talk to. I'm like, I just want you like do the journey that serves you right now. But promise me that if you start seeing signs of it not working, that you will react and pivot. And I think if we just do that, you'll start to find what does work for one's body. But we have to kind of get out of this kind of mentality of like, it's my way or the highway. It's like, no, the body knows what it needs. So here's a quote from Dr. Bill Schindler. He's a professor of archaeology. His quote is, "We are the only species in the world that looks to someone else to tell us what to eat." And when you think about that, that quote always lands on me. Really. It just makes me pause every time I say it. If you think
Wow.
about it, that may not seem like, well, who cares? But think about this. There are nearly 8 million species in the world, and we're the only one that doesn't know how to eat. So that tells you that whatever we're doing, the marketing, the kind of way that we're controlling and we're not controlling our agricultural systems, it's not working. And it's moved us further and further away from what our natural instincts are, but we have them. We have them and we've always had them. We just have to get back to them. And on a certain level, it may be really hard for people to get back to them, but it's not impossible. So we might not get exactly to the way we were, 300,000 years ago, but that's okay because we live in a different world, right? However, we can get closer. And one of the ways to get closer, so it's called the lingual neural response. Lingual neural response. So that is basically the process of you actually eating your food mindfully. So the smell of your food, the touch of your food, the mouthfeel, the chewing, the flavors, And when I say mindfully, that means not wolfing it down, not standing up, not rushing, but actually mindfully eating it and chewing it and letting your body communicate with itself like, do I want more of this or do I want less of this? That is your in towards getting closer to what your own body needs and wants. Because here's the thing, these biological responses were created 300,000 years ago. Like we're in Homo sapien, we are Homo sapien, Homo sapiens, right? So we have been in this basic human shape. The one we're in has been a few 100,000 years. So the kind of instincts that come with it were developed over that time. So that's really the key is to if you want to reconnect with what your body needs, you need to eat your food, not just swallow it. So that means trying to not do so many supplements and actually get your food, your nutrients from food. And that's precisely why Pluck is not in a capsule. It's because we want you to eat it because we know that your body will be able to tell you if you want more or less if you're eating it. But if you swallow, you know, organ capsules, a lot of times you'll just feel nauseous or you'll get some reaction or no reaction because your body, it's a delayed response.
Mhm.
So A, we want you to eat your food. And B, we want you to be mindful enough that you're not only thinking about what food do I want to let into my body, but you're eating slowly enough to let the communication happen. And that's like we're eating so fast sometimes that we only get a delayed response. So like think about Thanksgiving, like you're just eating and eating and eating, and then suddenly you're like, oh, I feel so stuffed, and you have to undo your buttons. And that's because you ate so fast that your body wasn't able to communicate in time that you were already past go, like that you were eating too much, right? So slow down. And what are some ways you can slow down? Well, you can do a prayer before you eat. You can take a breath. You can say grace. You can just be more like grateful and mindful and like sit for a second and just pour gratitude energetically or verbally or physically onto the plate and to the table and the people you're and choose wisely who you're eating around, like making sure that they're people that reinforce positive feelings in your life versus negative, and just mindfully eat, and you will see that your body will start to be clearer about what it needs and wants.
Yeah,
And
can I
yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say to support that, one of the things that we learned in school that I learned when I was becoming an HHP was the herbalist teacher was so funny. She actually was saying like, I've met a ton of people, but there's this one person that stuck out to her, and it was a lawyer who she ate clean all the time. She was like the fruit and vegetable. She actually ate organ meats, like 15 years ago before it was cool and in. And she was talking about how her diet was super clean, but she always was distended, always was super sick, constantly had issues. But that's the thing. When she'd wake up in the morning, she'd immediately get on a call, hop in the car, be chugging her green smoothie. But she's like stressed, yelling at people on the phone, driving around. And what people don't understand is that lingual response that you were talking about. When you're really intimate with your food in that way and intentional with what you're doing and why you're doing it, even through the food making process, which is what you were talking about earlier, um, not only can you settle down, but it actually triggers the parasympathetic nervous system, which pulls you out of fight or flight. And then your body actually can digest properly because when you're in fight or flight and your adrenals are firing, your cortisol levels get super high. That's when your small intestine literally can't do its job, and your stomach, your liver, your pancreas, everything. It can't do its job properly to be able to break down the proper enzymes and store your food properly through your mitochondria. And then also again through the colon, that's what causes people to have either chronic constipation or chronic diarrhea. There are so many things. And with you saying that too with food intention, I will say for myself, because my husband and I recently, actually only a month ago, we figured out why we were having chronic miscarriages for the first year of our marriage, which was a huge blessing. And it actually took me getting I had chronic UTIs, and I am a super clean eater. I have been for 10 years. Every once in a while, I'll have fun, like we'll go get an In-N-Out burger and a shake or whatever. But I should be able to have one of those every once in a while and not be like distended and look like I'm pregnant or like I'm gonna die, right? or
Yeah.
feel like I'm going to die afterwards. So it's about finding that healthy neutral. And we discovered it actually through me getting one of those most severe UTIs I've ever had. And me realizing, like, wow, I can't eat any sugar when we did food elimination. But I took a step back and I realized, like, I've done bacteria cleanses before and I've checked to see if I've had parasites, but I never checked to see if I had yeast overgrowth, which is huge in food nowadays and also just in general diet. Most of the things that we eat feed yeast. And once we figured that out, it was a game changer. James, I'll have to show you a picture afterwards. If you saw me a month ago, I literally looked like I was like 40 pounds heavier just in my face.
Yeah.
And so the fact that I've been preparing my body these past 10 years, eating healthy and taking care of myself, even though it was frustrating and I felt sick on and off and I couldn't figure out what was going on, that's why within a month, I was able to drop all of that inflammation so quickly. So I also want people to hear this, like, to be encouraged that even if you start eating healthier and you don't see something right away, once you get the proper diagnosis and once you take that time to be intentional, not just in your food, but with everything that's going on in your life, you'll have those aha moments where you're like, oh, this is the life-changing thing. So the same way that you guys had that with being intentional, taking back and figuring out what you wanted to do with your kids, like, you get those aha moments and then it's like forever, you can't live without it. So
Absolutely. And kudos to you because you did what I've been talking about, which is like you listen to your body's reaction. You know what I mean? Like people take that for granted. They think that, oh, I'll just know. It's like, no, you won't know unless you're looking. You won't
yeah,
know
you
because
have to be intentional.
you have